Good evening. From our headquarters in Kyiv, this is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only English-language prime-time TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm. My name is Josh Kavensky. I'm a reporter at the Kyiv Post. Tonight, we're going to go into depth on today's referendum on migrants, on refugees in Hungary. We're going to also have some reports on the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Babyn Yar massacre. We're also going to do interviews with world leaders who were at the YES conference in Kyiv earlier last month. About the geopolitical game in Eastern Europe, and also go into a World Bank decision to give $500 million to Ukraine to help accelerate its reform project. In the meantime, before we start, I want to tell you that you can download our podcast on Mixcloud if you want an audio-only version of the show. You can also see full versions of all of our interviews, as well as our Russian and Ukrainian language content at our website, hromadske.ua. If you want to watch this broadcast in Ukrainian, a simultaneous translation is being provided from the website as well. And we will rejoin you in 1 minute with the show. Hungary held a referendum today on whether to accept mandatory EU quotas on accepting migrants. There are a number of, it's been a hotly watched issue. Only Syrians and Iraqis are eligible, and in order for the vote to fully be legalized, there's a 50% threshold turnout. So that means 50% of the eligible voting population has to actually vote in the referendum for it to be considered legitimate. Around 1,300 refugees are proposed to go to Hungary as part of a wider EU program to shift the number of refugees from the Middle East around the continent. But now we have Andrew Byrne, a Financial Times journalist, joining us via Skype from Budapest. Hi, Andrew, how are you? I think we're having a slight technical difficulty here. Or is he here? I think we're having a slight... Hi, Andrew. So thank you for joining us. My first question is, what's the latest turnout numbers look like? Does it look like they're going to beat the 50% threshold? And if not, what's next?
Well, it looks right now, according to the latest poll figures from Nesopunt, which is a pro-government pollster, that the turnout will be somewhere between 42 and 45%, and that's below the legally required threshold of 50% for the result to be valid. The Fidesz, the governing party of Viktor Orban, the Fidesz deputy leader has conceded that the result will not meet the 50% threshold. But nevertheless, the government are declaring this a huge endorsement of their migration policies.
And are we going to see, actual policy shifts from their perspective? Do you think they're actually going to take in these roughly 1,300 migrants?
No, so the government put this proposal to the voters to endorse or reaffirm their policy of rejecting any migrant quotas. And although the turnout wasn't 50%, 95% of those voters who did turn out backed that position. They backed Viktor Orban in his position that Hungary should not accept any refugees against the will of the Hungarian parliament. So I think what we're going to see is some quite strong government spinning to the effect that this is an endorsement of their policies, an endorsement of the quite strident criticism of the EU and attacks on immigration that Viktor Orban has made over the last few years. And I don't think they'll see this as any cause for changing course.
95% there, that's quite a lot. But at the same time, I think a lot of foreign observers are somewhat taken aback. 1,300 people against a population of several million, it seems like really a drop in the ocean. So could you explain why the rhetoric has been so inflamed?
Well, Viktor Orban and his party have essentially said that this 1,300, I think it's 1,294 refugees that Hungary would accept under the quota, that this is, if you like, the thin end of the wedge. That once Hungary, if it agreed to this quota, it would then agree to compulsory resettlement of refugees in Hungary, and who knows where that might lead. So the specific EU proposal really is in a sense, it's not the central point of the story. The central point of the story is that Viktor Orban has used the whole issue of migration and fear of refugees and immigrants to bolster his political dominance at home and abroad. And so for him, it's not so much really about whether it's 1,200 or 2,000. It's the principle that only Hungary and Hungarians should decide who is allowed to enter their country.
Okay. And I mean, was there any real opposition campaign to speak of? And do Orban's political opponents, I mean, do they see this as a viable means of opposing him? Or is there pretty much broad-based agreement across the spectrum?
I mean, I think what's interesting is this referendum, in a sense, underlines so many of the interesting aspects of Hungarian politics. You have a very fragmented, splintered opposition that seems incapable of offering a unified political platform. And so in this referendum, as in previous elections, the opposition couldn't reach a joint position. Some parties suggested that voters should oppose the government's proposal. Others said voters should stay at home. Some NGOs said voters should spoil their ballots. So I don't think necessarily the opposition has a huge amount to be joyful about from this evening's results. I'm sure they'll be happy that the turnout wasn't valid. But at the same time, this is not necessarily a huge endorsement of the opposition by any stretch of the imagination.
And so returning to Orban, there's a lot of talk that, he's not so much interested in moving Hungary out of the EU, but really remaking the EU itself. I mean, what kind of image of the EU do you think he has in mind?
Well, what Viktor Orban has said is, and he says that now is a particularly interesting moment for the EU in the wake of Britain's vote to leave the Union. He thinks it's the time for member states to take back some control and autonomy from Brussels, from the European institutions. He very much dislikes the power of the European Commission to act as a check on different member states' policies. And so he has been calling for some time for a kind of decentralization of power from Brussels, a renewal of member state sovereignty. And while there isn't really many other member states who support this, he's also said that it's worth considering whether the EU's rule book, its founding treaties, should be changed to fit that vision. And that's certainly the kind of EU he has in mind.
And if, let's say, his government refuses to accept these migrants, I mean, what would the consequences for Hungary be within the EU and also in terms of international reputation?
Mm-hmm. Well, it should be borne in mind this resettlement program is over a year old. It was agreed by governments last May, and it totals about 160,000 refugees. Hungary has accepted 0, but most other member states have also failed to meet the target numbers they should accept under the scheme. And so there's a view, I believe, in Brussels and among many member states that in a sense this policy isn't really going anywhere anyway. That, in a sense, for some people makes the Hungarian referendum even harder to understand. This is a policy of refugee burden sharing that has floundered, has faltered. The Slovakian Prime Minister said it's politically finished as a policy. So with that in mind, I think it's unlikely we're going to see any legal action by the European Commission in Brussels to enforce or impose a quota on Viktor Orban, on Hungary. Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission president, himself said 2 weeks ago that solidarity of this kind cannot be imposed or enforced. So it looks, at least tonight, as a sort of a stalemate between Brussels and Budapest over these refugee policies.
Doesn't the fact that the policy is essentially failing invalidate his critique that the EU is too centrally controlled?
I think that's a fair argument. I think Viktor Orban has always portrayed the EU as, or at least in recent years, as determined to impose this policy, determined to send migrants to Hungary. And indeed, from his perspective, he's portrayed this idea of refugees being resettled as a sense of Brussels exporting terrorism and violent crime through immigration. So, it's in a sense, and many Hungarian analysts would tell you that this is, in a sense, the political theatre, the political drama that Viktor Orban has created. And for him to bolster his political authority in Hungary, to bolster his political support, it's important for him to have an external adversary for Hungary, an outside force like the European Union, who is simply, according to him, is determined to act against Hungarian interests. And so the policy and the details of the policy have really been a sideshow in this campaign. It's been a drama as portrayed by Mr. Orban of an overweening Brussels power against Hungary and other member states.
Okay, Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. That was Andrew Byrne, an FT Hungary correspondent, joining us via Skype from Budapest. Hromadski's Natalia Humaniuk spoke with Marta Orosz, a Hungarian journalist based in Berlin who has covered the migrant issue in her home country. She offers an interesting perspective on how the Hungarian government is dealing with the issue, and also really how the Hungarian government has formed a kind of narrative, which is what Andrew was just talking about, to gain political advantage off of an issue that in terms of actual policy is maybe not as big as many people think.
I think the most important point in this discourse or in this discussion on a European level is that there's a totally different narrative in Hungary to refugees, to immigrants, and to this whole situation. And this whole narrative places refugees, asylum seekers, in an absolute different role. So in Hungary, they don't appear in the role of people who flee from war and need help and need support and who really need to be supported in this very difficult situation. They are more like in the role of people who come here, to Hungary or to the specific country, and who will somehow will try to take advantage of this situation. Who will try to who will try to come to these societies and maybe cause major changes that the majority of the society doesn't want. And I also think that a very important issue is that the Hungarian government got this unprecedented opportunity of this refugee situation, of the so-called refugee crisis, to basically legitimize a lot of political measures that have been taking place in the past years. So there is this issue to which every country in the EU has to relate in a certain way, and the Hungarian government managed to form an alliance with 3 other countries, with Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland, to somehow channel their criticism towards the European Union, towards Brussels, and towards maybe tolerant policy towards immigrants and towards refugees. So I think this is one of the biggest differences.
Question: the referendums are legitimate, but what are the concerns regarding this kind of referendum you have on this particular issue, and also maybe you would also mention how many of the refugees you do have and how big is indeed an issue for the society compared to what it is in the political discussion?
Well, the referendum, concerning the referendum, it is about a 10 million country, a country of 10 million population like Hungary, accepting around maybe 1,200 refugees. So we can see that it's actually not about so big numbers compared to the actual country. And I think there were some opinions from the European Union, maybe from the European Parliament, who legitimately raised the question: the costs that you are spending on this referendum is actually almost as big as taking up these refugees and try to help them integrate in this society. And it's also, yes, it is a democratic measure to do to call a referendum on certain issues, but on the other hand, then it gets problematic when the society or the public attitudes have been manipulated before, and it gets problematic when the government actually makes efforts into manipulating this public attitude, makes efforts to show the society or to convince the society that this is not a good issue. So we are talking about a country, a very small country here, which doesn't really have experience with immigrants, which doesn't really have experience with foreigners. So these sentiments, these attitudes have been there. This is absolutely no question. But they haven't been so big and they haven't been so strong as they are now. They haven't been so strong as after all these campaigns initiated by the government, where you were all the time told that immigrants or refugees are going to come here, take your jobs, and pose a threat to you.
Kind of mainstream media, but just the opposition. That more or less you have this party which is in power and doing that, but how come that also the opposition more or less have taken the same discourse?
This is all about a very big political power dominating the discourse. So basically, if oppositional media or even if oppositional politicians or political parties would suddenly start with an absolute different discourse, an absolute different narrative, then they would already start in a totally different position as where the government started. So basically you have to go on at a certain extent with this existing narrative and this existing discourse to be able to join it. But I have absolutely no explanation for the fact that even oppositional media and even media which are not financed by the government or financed by the state also adopted some words and also refused to actually call the refugees, call the asylum seekers what they are. At this point, it is something that maybe professionally should be much more reflected on.
The refugees behind the referendum, many of whom are fleeing chaos in Syria and Iraq, they've all gone through a pretty much unimaginable range of horrible suffering in the wars they've seen and the often treacherous journey they've had to take to make it to Central and Western and Northern Europe, their destination. At the same time, one theater in Berlin is trying to give them a more human face, is trying to allow people to maybe empathize with them more. The Maxim Gorky Theater had a representative here this past week. They have a program called the Theater of the Refugee, and we spoke with a Syrian director who was in Kyiv last week.
I left Syria in July 2013, 3 years after, or almost 2.5 years after the revolution in Syria. I moved to Lebanon. I was between Lebanon and Syria from 2012, September, outside. But I keep the touch with Syria because I was teaching in the institute, the Higher Institute of Dramatic Arts. I was teaching acting. Then I should go and back the whole time. I'm originally from Deir ez-Zor, which the city now, before Al-Qaeda occupied it, then IS now who is control the situation there. After 2012, the first of 13, I felt it's no way to continue your work normal. I mean, it's not a life, not about just war situation, because the war situation is not Damascus, sure. It's Damascus, safe city with some rockets from time to time, but it's, I mean, nothing real happened except the checkpoints from the regime side, I think. And you can do anything about theater in Damascus now or from 2012, normal theater. You should, okay, maybe you can do Chekhov plays, classical plays, but you can't say what you want. That's why I decided really to leave Syria. Look, before the war in Syria, there was a good, really good scene for art, but it was controlled. The same, it's like everywhere. And when you have the security service, there's something control you. But we had some sites we can move or make this twisting between it. I was working for the interactive theater with August Paul method for 8 years. We did, as a group, I think more than 200 plays in the street in the 200 different villages in Syria. But it's not example. I mean, there is movements, but it's not real Syrian art like in the drama, the TV series is okay in Syria, but theater, writing, it wasn't that. It was good, but not what you can imagine, but not the same now, sure. And who's working in art, all of them, they left. I hope they can feel the loneliness, the killing, and the destruction. For me, that's why even I called it skeleton of an elephant in the desert, because really after war, especially, you know the war well, that everything is destroyed with the cement color. It looks like really a huge skeleton in somewhere. It's my history, it's my memory, it's my past. Then I can't deal with the memory of the others. It was not easier to deal with your memory, but it's easier to do it because the other's life is other's life. And I thought maybe it's more, it means a lot for me to do what I can do without adaptation, without now. Or it was a good chance for me even to present my work. It's clear that it's Syrian because I start as a Syrian telling my story. Then I switch to the sniper, the clown, the cameraman, the girl, the nurse, as a monologues, but as a witness, not as without opinion, as a, yeah, I'm with or against. Really, it's clear that I'm against. It's clear who's fighting now for me and in the text. In the art scene, I don't know if it's necessary to say that this man is the criminal because it's clear that he's a criminal. That's why I don't want to go to this side because it's politician and it's a bit cheaper than art for me. I tried to keep it because I didn't apply for asylum. I still have my Syrian passport because I'm opposition. I'm not refugee, I'm not politician. I'm just opposition for a situation in Syria. That's why I was really fighting to keep my identity with me, just to not present me as someone from, I don't know, a space, immigrants, refugees. I'm just normal person with his identity. If I'm Syrian or Chechen Syrian or Kurdish Syrian, it doesn't mean anything for the others. For me, it was kind of saving even.
This week, Ukraine marked 75 years since the Babyn Yar massacre in Kyiv. Over the course of 2 days, on September 29th and September 30th, 1941, approximately 34,000 Jews were shot to death at the Babyn Yar ravine. In the following months, the Germans, the Nazi occupying authorities, killed over 100,000 people. Those were communists, they were Roma people, they were also other Soviet prisoners of war. Around 2,500 Ukrainians have been recognized as righteous of the nations by the Israeli Yad Vashem project. Those are people who risked their lives to help Jews escape Nazi rule and survive the war. But this year's anniversary has seen the largest ever commemoration of Babyn Yar in Ukraine. Dozens of events were organized throughout the week, culminating on Thursday night when dignitaries from around the world, including the U.S. Commerce Secretary, as well as the Israeli, President, came and spoke to a gathered audience where President Petro Poroshenko also spoke. We did an interview with Yale professor Tim Snyder to hear his thoughts on the Babyn Yar massacre. It's quite interesting. He makes the point that Babyn Yar essentially was a starting point for the whole Holocaust. If you don't understand the Babyn Yar massacre, you can't understand the Holocaust as a whole. And you can watch the video right here.
If we talk about the Babyn Yar, we'll talk about now the anniversary, 75th anniversary of Babyn Yar. How would you fit the Babyn Yar story into the whole story of Holocaust?
Well, it's very important to explain Babyn Yar. It's much more important, for example, to explain Babyn Yar than it is to explain Auschwitz, because Auschwitz comes along much later. Babyn Yar is September of 1941. Auschwitz doesn't become the main place where Jews are killed until 1943. So if we want to understand how a Holocaust was possible, it's Babyn Yar that we have to understand. Once we understand Babyn Yar, then we can see how Auschwitz was possible. So in order to understand Babyn Yar, we have to see three basic things. The first thing we have to see is that Hitler had an idea according to which the Jews were the great enemy of the Germans, not because they were racially inferior, but because the Jews invented all the ideas, all the philosophies, all the laws, all the political systems, all the religions which held Germans back. And so in that ideological system, if anything went wrong for Germany, it could be blamed on the Jews. Second reason is the war. Hitler believed that what life really was a racial struggle for resources. Therefore, it was natural for Hitler that Germany should try to take Ukraine, because Ukraine, as Hitler saw matters, was a place where inferior people controlled very good land. So it was natural that Germans, for Hitler, should try to kill, enslave, starve the people who lived on that land and take it for themselves, not just to survive, but to become richer and more prosperous. And the third thing which makes the Holocaust possible is the destruction of political order, is the claim that previous states didn't exist, the conscious creation of a lawlessness such that people behave very differently than they behaved a day before or even a moment before. Babyn Yar in particular is the moment where the Germans learn that all these conditions brought together can allow for mass killing. When the Germans invade the Soviet Union, they're invading it to destroy the Soviet Union, they're invading it to take Ukrainian land, and as they invade, they start killing Jews. At Babyn Yar, and before Babyn Yar at Kamianets-Podilsky, the Germans realize that if they combine the SS, the police, the army, the civilian authorities, and local collaborators, they can create a moment where thousands, in fact tens of thousands of people can be killed all at once. This is crucial for the history of the Holocaust because it's the time when the idea of a final solution, that is a vision of a world without Jews, becomes the reality, becomes the mechanism, becomes the process, the example of how Jews can actually be killed.
Those who witnessed and survived the Babyn Yar massacre, some of them are still living. They lived through a mass extermination. They survived it in 1941. 160,000 Jews resided in Kyiv. 33,000 of them were subsequently murdered in the massacre. And after that, even more were deported to death camps around Nazi Germany. Hromadske managed to speak with one survivor of the massacre who is still alive and to this day lives in Kyiv.
They lived separately. I lived in a Ukrainian family with my mother and father. I saw the Jewish family for the first time when I was 3, the time when the tragedy was on a cart. My grandfather was a driver. He had a cart with horses. I remember he appeared in our yard. They said, Celia, we were going to go somewhere. We're not going to be killed. If we were going to be killed, people would be scattered. And so everyone was sure that they will go somewhere. There was a railway. Mother quickly picked things up. My grandfather gave my stepbrother to the nanny and said to my mom, you'll settle in a new place, write to me and I'll bring you Valentine. So we didn't think that we were going to die. People were driven from the place near the military graveyard that was near Khersonia. They didn't make bones, they were sticks, abuse, guns and strong language. When we came in the morning, my granny couldn't carry me home because I kept crying. For 3 days, she sat there with me in her arms near our home. We feared the black uniformed protection squadron and didn't fear the brown uniformed protection squadron. They were ordinary soldiers who missed their children. They called and threatened us.
failure to reform the country's lumbering government, and as well as waning interest, so-called Ukraine fatigue in the West, have left Ukraine arguably as a small pawn in a larger geopolitical game between Russia and the United States, with a potential settlement over the Syria conflict possibly seeing a settlement with Ukraine included in that. But how did we get to this point? The situation follows on years of instability in the region, a number of forewarning signs, including the 2008 Russia-Georgia war, might anticipate what has later happened with Ukraine and Russia. For example, many people from the West saw Putin for the first time as the bellicose leader he has proved himself to be. We at Hromadske managed to speak with Karl Rove. He was a top official in the administration of George W. Bush in the 2000s. We spoke to him about the administration's reaction to the war and also about alleged Russian support for the presidential campaign of Donald Trump.
Well, I like the position he had last year when he spoke to this conference, which is that he opposed Russia's efforts to bring down Ukraine and restore it to the Russian sphere of influence. I like that position.
And how about his more recent position, particularly the one about Crimean residents preferring Putin's?
Yeah, I think that was a mistake, and I think I think if he were to become president, people would point out to him what a dangerous precedent that would set if the United States was seen as favoring the dismantlement of a country by its neighbors against international norms and international law.
And I mean, over the summer we saw all these reports essentially arguing that because he has all these advisors who have ties to Ukraine, who have ties to Russia, that somehow influenced his views. Do you see any credence?
I do, and frankly, the removal of Paul Manafort, I think, was a good sign for Ukraine. He clearly was tied in with the old elements, and I thought that was very problematic.
And I mean, does it scare you possibly to have a Republican candidate who has these ties?
Yeah, look, he had those ties, but when he read the information that was revealed about Manafort's ties, how close he was to the regime, I don't think he should have been there in the first place. But Trump did the right thing by saying, this is an issue. I didn't know about these things. You're out.
So you think Trump made the right call and that he didn't do the proper due diligence? That was the big...
Yeah, well, absolutely. I don't think he did I think he did the right thing, but he didn't do the due diligence.
And what do you think about the U.S. response in general? In March 2014, after the annexation, you, I think, went on Fox News, and said that Putin was laughing at Obama's response because it was weak. Do you still hold that position?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, Putin takes the measure of people, and if he thinks that either circumstances and their background allow him to get away with it, he'll get away with it. And we should have learned this right at the beginning when Obama came in, and after we had our allies go out on a limb in Poland and Czech to accept missile defense installations there, and then without consultation with the governments of Poland or the Czech Republic, Obama withdrew them. In return, what did he get? Nothing from Moscow. And this should have been taken by the administration as a clear signal that they could take steps that they thought would bring a response from Russia, but they weren't going to get a response. And Putin probably was laughing the night the morning that he heard about the removal of the missile defense installations, because he got them free.
Sure. But I mean, to be fair, the 2008 war with Georgia happened under the Bush administration. Do you think the Bush administration should have responded in a harsher way to that?
Well, just remember what happened. They think Bush is weak. They think that Bush is it's the final month of the campaign. They think Bush is weak and unable to act. Condi Rice confronts Lavrov in Switzerland. Lavrov says, we're going to Tbilisi and we're moving Saakashvili from power. Condi says, no, you're not. We send naval assets to the Black Sea, and then we return the U.S.-trained, U.S.-equipped, battle-hardened Georgian brigades from Iraq on U.S. airlift capacity, so that no longer would the Russians be facing the police department and the volunteer fire department when they came marching into Tbilisi, and Putin stood down. And that was because when Bush notified him that we were doing that, because he wanted him to know we're going to stand behind these people. And you can just imagine the consternation, and I can just see Putin in the Kremlin saying, what else is on those C-17s besides U.S.-trained and battle-hardened Georgian soldiers? What else are they sending along with them?
But so at the very beginning you mentioned, though, that the initial reasoning from Putin, as far as you see it, was that the U.S. was somehow weak. At least he perceived the U.S. to be that way. I mean, Bush launched 2 wars during his administration. If that still gives off a picture of weakness. I mean, what strength?
Well, Bush was politically weak. He looked at Bush and saw approval ratings down, likely to be succeeded by Barack Obama, a critic of the Iraq War. And I think he said, here's a moment that we can maneuver. And that it will face this again, in my opinion, either before the end of the Obama administration or in whatever follows. There will be a testing of the coming president, and one final test for this president potentially.
That was our interview with Karl Rove. I want to remind you that you can watch full versions of all of our interviews unedited on our website, en.hromadske.ua. After the summer's coup attempt in Turkey, the country's orientation changed fast, with Turkey restoring its relations with Russia, following the shoot-down of a Russian jet over Turkey, or over Syria, I should say, in November of the previous year. Russia was one of the first countries to express support for the Erdogan government as the coup was occurring. In fact, they expressed support for Erdogan before the West, while the West, including the White House, was waiting to see where the winds were blowing on the coup. The shift in relations in Turkey has left many in Ukraine wondering where exactly the country stands and whether the country will continue to support Ukraine in its ongoing tensions or conflict with Russia. Hromadske journalist Natalia Humanyuk spoke with Turkish Deputy Prime Minister Mehmet Simsek about this issue and others.
You have this kind of a rapprochement, the better relations with Russia after the pretty long conflict. We know the reasons. Usually they are economic. It's tourism, agriculture, some problems with even particular smaller industries. But from here, does it look like that Turkey is so pragmatic that it doesn't care about the political relations, about its allies? You know, we are looking at the Crimean Tatars, about annexation of Russia, but is Turkey just about the, doing business, disregarding all that things?
No, that's not true. First of all, what has happened is normalization of relations with Russia. So essentially, following the downing of the Russian plane, there was a complete freeze, there was a complete disconnect with Russia. I don't think that's a sustainable type of relationship between any neighbors. Turkey and Russia have been neighbors for almost 1,000 years. And I think it's important that in our region that we maintain good dialogue, some sort of normal relationship. So that's first. Secondly, no relationship between one country with another one is basically alternative to another relationship. So while we're maintaining strong focus on Ukraine and we strongly support Ukrainian territorial integrity, we would like to continue to enhance dialogue with our entire neighborhood. Because if neighborhood is in more sort of peaceful, stable shape, I think everybody benefits from it. So our normalization with Russia, relationship with Russia, is not an alternative to our good relations with Ukraine.
At this stage, we understand that the majority of Turkish people didn't support the attempt coup d'etat. At the same time, after we following closely, there were numerous arrests, there were reports on the detention of the journalists, even like tortures in the prisons, and we're speaking about 1,000 people. And even like some advice not to communicate a lot with the Western partners for the academians. You're like somebody who worked in the United Kingdom, somebody who considered to be liberal. What is your answer? Because that just doesn't look that sometimes this answer looks disproportional.
Well, first of all, you mentioned a few things. So let me clarify. We have zero tolerance to torture, zero tolerance. So even against perpetrators of a violent coup, we will adhere democratic standards, we will apply rule of law. So that's no question. I just want to make it clear. Secondly, as far as people who are under arrest, Those people are under arrest because they were either involved directly in the violent coup attempt or part of this secretive network, and it's proven with the evidence. So it is not like, trying to get rid of the opposition. It's not a heavy-handed approach. This is not an ordinary event. On July 15th, basically, a group of armed forces supported by judiciary, supported by media outlets of this secretive religious cult, basically they try to destroy democracy, they try to destroy rule of law. But we will still apply rule of law. What has happened since then, of course, any country would have gone after those who were either complicit in the coup attempt or perpetrator of coup attempt. It's only natural that you do that. But we are still subject to European Court of Human Rights rulings. We still apply that rules. So I just want to make that clear.
So all of these videos are from the YES, that is Yalta European Strategy Conference, which was held in Kyiv last month. Next, we have an interview with the former Swedish Foreign Minister, Karl Bildt, who spoke generally about the effect of Russian foreign policy, not only on Ukraine and the region, but also on world geopolitics.
People are, again, prior to the US election, really concerned that, like, would we expect that anything big, any deal could happen when there is this, misunderstanding? What is happening in the US? We don't understand what's happening with Brexit. So we have the pre-election time in Germany, which has started. So that's make Ukrainians concerned that, would it be any coherent foreign policy from the point of view of the West and, vice versa?
And will there be a Korean foreign policy of Russia, which I think is the number one question. The Russians are having their election, and believe it or not, they are somewhat nervous about stability in connection with and after the election, and I think they are don't rock the boat at the moment. What they will do, and we see significant personnel changes on all of the higher organs in Moscow. So there's uncertainty of what Moscow really wants. There were some tentative signs of them making moves on Donbas, say, late spring. I don't see any sign of a move from the Russian side at this time.
How united is the West? And, can the role of Germany change with the, a bit of a, let's say, different policy Mr. Steinmeier takes and Ms. Merkel does?
I think there's nuances. I think they are basically united. I think that applies to Europe as well. Of course, there are always different ideas circulating around. Can we try this and can we try this? But at the end of the day, it all ends up with not much of a response in Moscow. It's only when there is serious signs of Moscow starting to move on the basic security issues in Donbas, I think it will happen at some point in time, that those sorts of policy discussions become more acute.
And what is the impact of the U.S. election? How it influenced the whole, the all kind of possible agreements, discussions?
Difficult to know. I think from the Washington point of view, it might have been that President Obama is obviously interested in his legacy. Had it been possible for him to do a Donbas-Minsk deal prior to leaving office, I think he would have done it. But Moscow is not particularly happy with him. They fear Clinton even more, but perhaps they are hoping for Trump.
Are you concerned? And how it sounded, we heard the Americans coming here, they didn't sound coherent. I mean, I'm speaking to different people, also like persons like Newt Gingrich, but to which extent Europe and NATO should be concerned about the U.S. elections?
Well, I am concerned. I mean, we have a more profound debate in the U.S. about U.S. foreign policy than we had for a long time. And sort of the anti-trade and anti-NATO forces are there very vocally in the debate. That's worrying, no question about that. So that's a source of concern, and I'm quite certain that Moscow is following this very intensely. Positive is, of course, that even if we would wish reforms to go fast in Ukraine, Ukraine is essentially stable, and that's good.
And you've heard currently to our Prime Minister, you probably heard the President. At this stage already, what is the general perception? You know, because the general perception, it's too slow, but that's something we talked a year ago. At this stage, what would be your impression from, and what you hear from the, Brussels and the other cabinets?
I think the Yatsenyuk government did more than it's given credit for. We should not forget that, go back to 2014, 2015, Ukraine was on the verge of collapse. Financial collapse and security collapse. I mean, it was an imminent danger of that happening. No one is talking in those terms. I mean, Ukraine has been stabilized. And it has turned the corner, but now it has to continue on this particular course for quite a number of years. And perhaps some of the energy have gone out of some of the reform movement here. I hope that can come back.
There is promising news for Ukraine in terms of business. The World Bank says that economic growth rose to 0.8% in the first half of 2016. That is after falling many percent for the past couple of years. So it's all relative, but the figure is set to rise over the next couple of years as well. However, in the organization's report, which they recently released on the Ukrainian economy, they warned that the slow-paced reforms, ongoing corruption, warned the Donbass, as well as the lack of external demand to actually invest in Ukraine is hampering the economic recovery. They did, however, announce new money that they intend to give to Ukraine in the sum of $500 million. Hromadske TV's Volodymyr Solahub spoke with Satu Kahkonen, the World Bank country director for Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine, to find out more about what we can expect from the World Bank's program here in the future.
What are these reforms, in your opinion, the Ukrainian government should take in order to achieve this growth?
There was a set of reforms, and we had actually four headlines in our update. One focused on the macroeconomic stabilization, the second on the promotion of productivity growth, the third on the provision of services effectively to Ukrainian population, and the fourth one on corruption. Without tackling the corruption and enhancing the governance in Ukraine, none of the other reforms will work. We have currently ongoing projects on roads in our portfolio, and the amount, these projects total, the commitments for those roads amount to about $1 billion. So that's the $1 billion that the government is talking about, the money that has already been committed for the projects that are ongoing. In addition, what we are doing right now with the government of Ukraine, that we are working on the prioritization of the transport corridors. So this will help then the government as they move ahead to identify that what would be the priority investments to move forward, and then also to try to generate or to try to get other donors as well as private investors to come in and finance the road construction. There was unfortunately an incidence of corruption in one of our projects, or one of our joint projects with the authorities. The issues have now been addressed and the project is moving forward. But we are watching it very carefully, and if there's any whiff of improper action, we are going to swing into the action again.
So this is the project for the road improvement road constructions. When you said that there was an issue with the corruption on this project, and that this issue has been addressed, have the responsible people on the Ukrainian side been fired or jailed?
I think this is an issue that you should ask from the government.
But the government is trying to steal, or somebody is trying to steal, the money which are being provided by the World Bank.
In our case, what we can do, we are exposing, if there's an allegation of corruption, we are sending our team out. We are doing the analysis, we are doing the investigations, we are passing on then the information to the government. We expect the government to take the action, move the corrupt individual. How the government is doing that is then the responsibility of the government. We can't get involved into the personal issues.
But isn't it concerning then for the World Bank that if government does not do enough to prosecute the corruption, especially with such high-profile projects as with the World Bank project, then something like similar cases may occur again?
Obviously, it is a concern to the World Bank. But again, it is something that we hope and we expect that the government will take action.
What are the other projects which are currently in the pipeline between the World Bank and the Ukrainian government?
At the moment, we are first of all preparing a $500 million gas guarantee for the government of Ukraine. The guarantee will support the government to purchase gas for the heating season. In addition to that, there are two other operations that we are preparing, one focusing on access to longer-term finance by small and medium-sized enterprises, and another one focusing on services provided to the communities.
Can we discuss a little bit in more detail the $500 million gas guarantee? Is that something which will be provided for natural gas and something which will also involve commercial institutions?
That's correct, because it's a guarantee. It's a guarantee. We are guaranteeing loans from the financial markets to the Naftogaz to pay for the purchases of gas.
Who will provide the financing?
The World Bank will provide the guarantee. It's not a loan, it's a guarantee that in case there is a default, then the World Bank will pay. But we are using or utilizing our AAA rating to reduce the cost of financing. So there are significant benefits here for the government.
Is the government also providing some sort of guarantees in this project, or this is only guaranteed by the World Bank?
This is guaranteed by the World Bank.
Mm-hmm. But who will finance this? So the World Bank is backing the deal, but who will provide the real money?
Other commercial banks. There's right now negotiations going on, and I'm sorry, but I can't talk about that yet.
Thank you for watching our show tonight. I want to remind you that you can find all of our content on our YouTube channel, that is all the full interviews, as well as on our website, en.hromadske.ua. You should stay in touch with us throughout the week to get up-to-date news on happenings in Ukraine. You can also read the Kyiv Post for the same in-depth English language coverage of what's going on in Ukraine and the region. My name is Josh Kavensky. I'm a reporter at the Kyiv Post, and I want to thank you again for joining us tonight.
Здравствуйте. В эфире «Громадская на русском».
В студии Павел Козарь и Ольга Духнич.
Нужно добиться сначала свободы.
Видимо, тогда за это будет платить Москва.
Это другая сторона глобализации.
С кем ты, мастер культуры?
Громадская на русском, когда ценности важнее языка.
Когда-нибудь соберемся все вместе.
Громадская на русском. 33 буквы, 60 минут. Упорядочиваем хаос до состояния смысла.
За цей рік ми побували в різних куточках України. Ми побачили, що країна змінюється.
Можливо, не так швидко, як нам би хотілося, і попереду ще багато роботи.
Стеж за змінами. Дивися реформу.
Щовівторка о 21:00.
Це громадське світ.